and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup, freezing in this cold studio and therefore wearing a lovely wool scarf.
You see how much she sacrifices for you.
You've done this show in your coat.
I have, but since then I've added a nice layer of
Avoirdupois.
Well, in the news,
Yes.
the action on LGBT rights in this country has moved to the state legislatures, and most of it is not good.
Yeah, they're not giving up. And there was a bitter conflict, really sad and irresolvable, I think, in many ways, at the National LGBT Task Force's Creating Change Conference in Chicago this week, a dispute over the Middle East issues.
But we've got an out lesbian high court judge in Minnesota and a transgender judge in Canada.
And a New York City Council member who has just come out and is being praised for coming out by some who are still in the closet.
It's pretty funny. Rand Paul has an out gay Democratic opponent for the U.S. Senate from Kentucky.
That would be exciting. There are disturbing new details in the police killing of a gay man in San Diego.
Pope Francis is fighting the civil unions bill in Italy, even though he supported civil unions to try to stop same-sex marriage in Argentina, unsuccessfully there.
I guess marriage is not such a threat in Italy. The International Olympic Committee has issued revised guidelines for participation in competition by transgender athletes.
And we'll tell you about movies in the works on Alexander McQueen and Robert Mapplethorpe. And we would also, if you can hear us, like to speak to our Manhattan viewers who watch us on Time Warner Cable. We know some of you have been having sound problems. We're going to send this out on our email as well. If you do, please write to program@mnn.org. Tell them where you live, tell them what the problem is, and you can copy me, Andy Hum, at AOL.com, and that would help.
We are trying to get this problem fixed, but you can also always watch the show online at gayusatv.org. Watch it, listen to it, whatever. So if you're ever having a problem, gayusatv.org, where you can get the current show and all the past shows.
I always post the show on Facebook, and I have on my page and on the Gay USA Facebook page. Please like us on Facebook, as they say on every show these days.
They're going to hate us if we don't stop talking about this.
Okay, let's give them the news.
All right.
Good news. Want good news or bad news?
Well, I want to headline this by saying there are currently 100 plus bills proposed in 26 states having to do with LGBT people and issues, and most of it is not good. And the
record is being set in Oklahoma for bad legislation.
Yeah.
But again, we got through last year being able to beat back many of these, and it's already a mixed bag in some of the state legislatures. Yes. I mean, for instance, should we talk about, what do you want to start? Indiana?
Well, we could start in Indiana.
Yes.
There are 3 bills at least on the table there. One, a horrendous bill. They held a hearing on that this week and killed it, or refused to hear it even.
It was a super RFRA, a Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Now, this is what the whole thing that they went through last year.
Yes.
So they did kill that. But
it was even worse than the one we got amended last year.
But they've also introduced an LGBT rights bill, and then they kind of got rid of transgenders, and then they kind of added terrible amendments to it. So our side is basically saying, do the right thing. Just amend the law to add sexual orientation and gender identity to our human rights law. Nothing else is acceptable, and nothing else is going to be acceptable to us or the business community, which raised all the fuss the last time.
Exactly. But these right-wing legislators, mostly put in office by the Koch brothers and their ilk. Did you read the latest Koch brothers article in the New Yorker? I have to digress
Jane
for a
Mayer?
minute. Yes.
Yes.
Well, the revelatory thing about it was they're putting on this big PR campaign for themselves these days and acting like they're in favor of criminal justice reform. But it turns out the reform they want instituted is no more prosecutions of white-collar executives for environmental damage.
I mean,
that is literally what they're trying to stop.
if you don't know the Koch brothers by now, this is the reason that America is in this gridlock, because they bought it for us. They invested heavily in the 2010 elections, elected state legislatures all across the country, notably in North Carolina and other places.
And all these right-wing Republican governors.
And then those legislatures got to draw the House lines for the United States, which is all perfectly legal. And that's why you have a right-wing Congress led by Republicans, even though most people vote Democrat.
And the right-wing state legislatures that are putting forth all these scores of anti-LGBT bills. That's why I permitted myself that digression, because really that's where it all comes from, is that all these, you think Ted Cruz is bad, there are thousands of Ted Cruzes in state legislatures around this country who are pushing relentlessly.
No regulation. Let Flint drink dirty water.
The regulation is against us and anybody else who's at all progressive. It's no regulation for the bad guys, regulation only for the good guys.
Which is why, even when we talk about the presidential election and the hopes of having a progressive president, the idea of electing a progressive Congress is almost nil in this election. It's possible, but it's almost nil, given the way the lines are drawn. 2020 will be the next chance to elect state legislatures that could undo this, but it's all going to be a tough lift.
And they're pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into this all over the country over and over and over again, because they're not giving up, and because they pay attention and we don't, and we have to start paying attention. So
we're glad that you pay attention.
So in Florida this week, a Senate committee was scheduled to hold a hearing on an actual good bill, a proposed sexual orientation, gender identity, non-discrimination Act for the state of Florida.
What did they do instead? They passed the Pastor Protection Act, a totally unnecessary bill which says that pastors can't be forced to do same-sex marriages. They're not forced to already.
And they postponed any discussion of the non-discrimination bills until, maybe later sometime this year.
And then we go to
in
Tennessee.
Okay.
They rejected a bill to nullify the Supreme Court marriage decision. So the Family Action Council is saying they're going to sue about this and try to get it nullified. They have a novel legal argument that since the Supreme Court...
Novel is a euphemism for crazy.
So since the Supreme Court overturned our marriage law, which excludes gays, we don't have a marriage law in Tennessee, and nobody can get married.
But here's we have several stories from Tennessee this week, and one of them is that in one county, Washington County, the commissioners there were scheduled to take a vote on a resolution to condemn same-sex marriage. 350 people showed up, mostly in red sweatshirts, to signify their support of same-sex marriage, and the meeting had to shut down because they couldn't let everyone in the room, and they have an open meetings law that says everyone who shows up has to be let in, so they could not take the vote to condemn same-sex marriage because too many on our side actually showed up. Congratulations.
Well, if you want to keep track of all of this, and we're going to talk about some more about it, there are a couple of websites to go to track legislation in your area. One is run by the Equality Federation, and you can go to equalityfederation.org/LAC, legislative action something, LAC. And the other
Center. They've put together this new thing
Legislative Action Center.
Yeah.
And then the other one is called protectthineighbor.org, and they're tracking all of these bills in every state, and it's going to be a lot of action over the next couple of weeks and months.
Well, you mentioned that Oklahoma holds the record. They have 26 bad bills proposed, and their legislature starts work next week on February 1st. So pay attention if you're in Oklahoma and see what you can do there.
It's already bad in South Dakota, where a committee passed legislation preventing transgender students from using facilities consistent with their gender identity. Now, there's a risk that they're running afoul, that the state will run afoul of Title IX funding if they do this, but they don't seem to care.
Well, you remember the Tennessee legislator who didn't care that they were going to lose $85 million, I think, in federal funds, or maybe it was more than that. I'm now calling these bills the birth restroom bills. You are required to use the restroom in for the gender of your birth.
Even if you have an indeterminate gender at birth?
They don't care. They'll happily assign you a gender arbitrarily.
That's just outrageous.
In Missouri, the governor, Jay Nixon, has been eloquently pleading for a sexual orientation, gender identity, non-discrimination bill from his legislature, but they are ignoring that and trying to push a Religious Freedom Restoration Act kind of bill.
Okay. Anything else on state legislation that you want to talk about?
I don't think so,
All right,
no.
some other state news.
Yeah.
In Kentucky, the mayor of Lexington, Kentucky, Jim Gray, is going to contest the Democratic nomination for U.S. Senate to challenge Rand Paul, who is sort of running for president right now, but is up for re-election this year, and that's where he will likely end up. He says he doesn't think voters will focus on his sexual orientation. But in the Bronx, longtime council member Jimmy Vaca has finally focused on his sexual orientation.
We have a picture of him buried somewhere on this list. There he is.
Our friend Bill Dobbs calls this adult onset homosexuality. Well, I mean, I've heard about Jimmy for years. He's 60 years old. He had been married. He has a kid. He finally decided to come out. But he tweeted about this, and he said, After talking with family and friends, I've decided to come out publicly as a gay man. Now, back to the Golden Girls. Now, Jimmy, all you had to write was that last part, and we would have known that you were gay.
Andy.
Come on.
And there is at least one prominent politician in New York City who is believed to be a lesbian who congratulated Jimmy with a tweet that said, "And the truth shall set you free." Yeah. While she is believed not to be telling the truth about herself.
And, Jimmy is apparently, basically a fairly decent council member, but he did fund an anti-gay St. Patrick's Day parade up in the Bronx.
Should we do a little more political news before we get to creating change?
Yes.
The Human Rights Campaign is getting some blowback for their endorsement of Hillary Clinton for president. People have put together a change.org petition. People are unliking HRC on Facebook in large numbers.
In the debate, they were both pretty passionate about their support for LGBT rights and talked about it. Bernie and Hillary, and who's the other?
O'Malley.
I keep forgetting him.
Well, it's just an age thing.
We'll see. Yeah.
But they're...
What, I don't like young people?
Well, no. But Bernie, I think, has been perfectly fine about this, explaining the difference between establishment leaders and the grassroots. And as several have pointed out, there was Chad Griffin, the head of HRC, at the World Economic Forum with Joe Biden talking to corporate leaders, Biden saying to corporations, you can have a lot more power than governments even in advancing LGBT rights. And that's not exactly the picture of an LGBT leader as an outsider.
Right.
So I think when Bernie calls HRC leadership establishment, first of all, he's not trying to say that they're, running the country. Yeah. But it's not an unfair point.
Everybody's very divided about this. We all argue about it on Facebook, but I think we'll all be together in November. Of course, Mike Bloomberg is trying to throw a wrench into the works by running for president, and people are speculating, whether this would hurt the Democrats or Republicans more. I mean, who knows? I mean, we have a picture of him with his beard, Diana Taylor. We want to. A lot of people think, he'd be great. For those of you who love billionaires running the world, had a very problematic record on LGBT rights over the
Yes.
years, well documented on this show, vetoed a number of LGBT bills.
Although will be described in perpetuity, like Rudy Giuliani, as the pro-gay mayor of New York City.
Right.
But, you know, it's important to say that Bloomberg has said he is running only if Bernie is the Democratic nominee, not if Hillary is the Democratic nominee,
Right.
because he sees her as more centrist and therefore closing off possibilities for him. So he's not running yet, and he may or may not run.
Ted Cruz, we don't usually talk about all these crazy people that support them, but he proudly accepted the endorsement of Pastor Mark Bickle, who preaches that Jews are prodded to convert to Christianity by what he calls hunters, and that one of the hunters was Adolf Hitler. To push the Jews towards Christianity. He also says that Oprah Winfrey is the Antichrist's forerunner.
Well, Donald Trump accepted the endorsement of John Rocker, the former Atlanta Braves pitcher, who said he wouldn't want to play for a New York team because then he'd have to take the number 7 train to Queens with homos with AIDS. And a lot of other lovely phrases.
As Donald says, I love my people. I love my people. We're laughing, but I hope we're not laughing in November.
Yeah, and congratulations to out lesbian judge Margaret
Chutin, I think it is, isn't it? Chutich, yeah. We have a picture of her
Minnesota.
with the governor, with Mark Dayton. There she is.
Has
I
been
apologize
appointed to the Minnesota Supreme Court by Governor Dayton, the first out member of that court. So congratulations to her, and thank you to Governor Dayton. Okay. I think we have been avoiding, but must finally get into a description of what happened at Creating Change this last week.
This is the National LGBTQ Task Force's annual conference. I think it's been going on for 28 years.
Right.
Big conference, 4,000 people in Chicago. And we told you last week about the controversy, which was there was a group called A Wider Bridge.
Yes.
Which is...
It's a U.S. group that works with the Israeli government to promote LGBT relationships with Israel. And has been accused of being somewhat of an apologist for the government. The Israeli government is accused by some of pinkwashing their own bad actions against Palestinians and others in the Middle East by saying, you know, well, we're nice to the gays.
And they're not. They also like to say that the Palestinians are not
that we're not saying they're not.
Right.
So A Wider Bridge has a somewhat political relationship with the Israeli government. And they were sponsoring events at the Creating Change conference that involved Jerusalem Open House, which is the LGBT center in Jerusalem.
Which serves Palestinians and Jews.
Yes, LGBT. And one of whose members or someone associated was killed at the Pride March last year.
In Jerusalem.
Terrible. We have had a previous head of the Jerusalem Open House on this show years ago.
We have had the head of the Palestinian LGBT group on this show.
We have. And we recognize, and we didn't make this up, I think we all recognize how difficult these issues have become over the years.
I mean, it was in the news this week. I mean, Ban Ki-moon was having a fight with Netanyahu about Palestine.
So,
the head of the UN. So.
Creating Change had scheduled these events sponsored by A Wider Bridge. There were people at Creating Change who objected to that and said that the task force was being too much on the side of the Israeli government and the pinkwashing approach by letting these events happen. And so the task force immediately canceled those events, and they were scheduled elsewhere by those groups.
There was an uproar.
Yes. Then there was an uproar in response to that, and so the events were rescheduled. And then Ray Carey, the head of the task force, said, well, I hope I'm sure there will be protests on either side, but I hope they can just be peaceful. We cast some doubt on that possibility, and as it turns out, it was a mess. It was horrible. It was.
Will we show the B-roll?
Yes, let's take this B-roll. A little sound up at first, and then we'll talk over it as we let it run. This is a. Can we get the sound up on that? So, can we talk over this? Take the sound under a little. Keep the video running. So this was 200 people at the conference marching through the halls outside the Jerusalem Open House event. And this is the mild part of the demonstration. It got very contentious.
I mean, there are disputes about who really got disrupted by this, what floor was it on, all this kind of stuff. It's a little hard to sort out, and there are conflicting accounts.
But it was very fraught. The hotel security called the police. The Jerusalem Open House people were taken out a back door of the room where they had been trying to hold the event. There were a few people from the protesters who got into the room to raise their voices against the appearance of the Jerusalem Open House people.
There were reports that the Jerusalem Open House people fled, were not able to conduct their thing.
Yeah.
The Muslim Alliance for Sexual and Gender Diversity, said, rejected a follow-up dialogue called Radical Dialogue, Palestine, Israel, and LGBTQ people. So at this point, they don't know what to do. Ray Carey gave a speech where she said, "I failed to live up to the ideals of our mission and our values. I have a lot of fears about the direction of the movement at this point."
Well, I think that's a bit much. I think they stepped into a terrible situation that has been an unresolvable situation for scores of years in the Middle East.
Right.
And to think that this wasn't going to crop up or that it would be easily resolvable is, I don't want to call them naive. They operated with the best of intentions. No one was trying to make this happen. The protesters feel very offended that what they regard as a racist regime was allowed to present without comment. The supporters of Jerusalem Open House feel tremendously insulted and offended that the protest was allowed to take place and that the Israelis were not more defended.
And, there are charges that there are many repressive regimes around the world, including the United States in some cases, which we do criticize on this program. What about the proportionality of protests? I mean, no one, I didn't see in any of the articles anyone underestimating the plight of the Palestinian people, and especially in the areas where there are the settlements and things like that. But why is this the only thing that's being protested given everything else is going on? That came up.
Again, we're certainly not going to resolve this conflict. No. There are a lot of people who see this as a special case and different from other situations. The tragedy is that everybody left Chicago with such hard feelings, such anger, such resentment. And what should have been a conference that brought together LGBT activists from around the country, 4,000 of them, to learn from each other, to network, to organize, has devolved into this very, very sad dispute.
I mean, I would raise the question, how can we come together and discuss these issues for the benefit of the Palestinian people and others, who are hurt by these things?
Or should we?
I think the world should, and it's
yes.
And it's
well,
very,
the
very
world has been trying to for a long time,
right.
With no great resolution. I would like to once again quote Rodney King: "Why can't we all just get along? Why does the human race set out to destroy itself like this?" But there seem to be no easy answers and no willingness to get over these ongoing grievances and pain. There is clearly a great deal of pain going on
Absolutely.
here.
Yeah. All right.
So all we can do is describe to you what happened. We don't have any easy answers, and just let you know that that is going on.
All right.
On to other things.
If you're still listening, and I hope you're still keeping an open mind.
Yeah.
In some other news, Eric Fanning, who was the nominee for Secretary of the Army, finally got a hearing before the Senate Armed Services Committee, a hearing of an hour led by John McCain. It went smoothly. No questions about his sexual orientation. They did ask if General Petraeus should be demoted after his resigning over an extramarital affair, and Fanning said no. But Fanning did get an endorsement from Lindsey Graham.
I smell a theme in this show. In Illinois, a judge has rejected a gay employee's claim against his employer that he was discriminated against on the basis of sexual orientation, and that was
sex discrimination.
Yeah, thank you.
Under Title VII. Yeah.
The judge said that there is a precedent in the Seventh Circuit in a 2000 decision that said sexual orientation is not a protected class, and therefore you cannot claim that that is covered.
So now this person has to come back and actually make a case for direct sex stereotyping. I mean,
yes.
EEOC has already concluded that it is sex stereotyping. But
that is open to judicial interpretation,
and that's what's happening.
We've had some good decisions in courts and some not so good, and that's why we must continue to press for the Equality Act.
And we get good and bad things out of the U.S. Department of Education. They have been giving exemptions to religious universities that get federal funds that want to be able to discriminate against gay people. And they're now going to post the names of these schools that they are exempting.
Yep. And in other educational news, back to Tennessee, Franklin City High School in Winchester, Tennessee, started a gay-straight alliance supported by the principal, but there are parents out there attacking this. One guy was posting, you know, this is creating ISIS-like conditions in the school, and there are kids there, he called it ungodly too, kids wearing straight pride T-shirts and defacing gay positive signs in the school. That's kind of a mess.
Well, GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, did a survey, and there were a couple of things that jumped out at me. Americans are growing more comfortable with LGBT people in their lives, but when they surveyed non-LGBT people, 29% are uncomfortable with having a gay person teach their child, and 37% are uncomfortable with hearing that their child got a gay history lesson today in school.
Only 37%? I think that means we're doing pretty well.
Half of them think that we've already got all our rights, and what's the problem?
Yeah. In Minnesota, well, here's a good story. An employee of something called Deluxe Financial Services settled her claim with the employer. She's transgender and had a claim against the company for discrimination and harassment. And the company has agreed to pay her $115,000, give her an apology, and make some policy changes.
In San Diego, now we told you about how a young man named Joshua Sisson was killed by the police on January 1st after a domestic dispute with his lover. The police officer in the case, a lot of details are emerging about Richard Bloterra. He has shot 3 people dead since June 13th. The police will not release the video in this case that was on his body camera. The family is investigating, hiring its own investigator. Officials say Butera offered aid to Sisson, that he aided him after he shot him. Witnesses say, oh no, he let him die. And when they complained, he said, oh, he'll be okay. It took 20 minutes to get the ambulance in the case, so a very disturbing case, a lot of conflicting testimony.
There's a police officer on trial in New York who just shot blindly in a stairwell in a public housing project and killed a guy. And he's also being accused of not having done a thing to help the guy after he shot him.
No, he just plotted to develop a cover story while the guy is lying there dying. Come on.
It's bad enough that they're shooting him, but they're whatever. Right. A couple of other small notes. There's a new organization called the Sports Equality Foundation, created to deal with LGBT issues in the sports world. Jason Collins, ex-basketball player and Billy Beane, baseball official, are both involved with that. Bad news from the international organization that is considering the application by a community group for the .gay designation, internet.
URL, yes.
They've rejected the community application by saying that gay is not a well-known abbreviation for LGBTQIA. Gay is, don't talk to this show. And it's all considered a plot to force others to spend a lot of money for the URL, and it's a real mess.
Representative Louis Gohmert of Texas, a famous right-winger.
Yes.
He's the one who wants Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Elena Kagan impeached for performing same-sex marriages and ruling on the case. He says they should have been disqualified, even though the weddings were legal. But this week he said, the Supreme Court is telling us, we are your God now. Do as we tell you to do.
Louis, you are a traitor who should be tried and sent to prison for treason for not supporting the Constitution of the United States.
Right.
And on this Saturday at 10 p.m. on the OWN network, Oprah's network, you can watch an episode of the Where Are They Now show, which includes an update on Jazz Jennings, the star of I Am Jazz.
If you're not worried about Oprah being the forerunner of the Antichrist, according to a Ted Cruz supporter.
In San Francisco, Robert Pritchard is suing the engineers union, claiming that they refused him pension benefits when his husband, who was a member of the union, died. The union is claiming, well, you know, the Defense of Marriage Act said we didn't have to do that. Really? San Francisco Union? I don't think so.
Okay.
International news.
Well, let's update you on a case from last week. We talked about that case in South Australia where a gay couple who had just gotten married were on their honeymoon and one of them died. And then South Australia would not put the surviving spouse on the death certificate as the spouse. Well, they've reversed themselves. And the leader of the whatever it is province in South Australia.
The province is South Australia,
yes.
and it's the
He's
premier.
the premier, right? He said he would restore. He said he was ashamed of how Marco was treated after David's death. David's organs were, by the way, donated to a hospital there.
The premier is correcting the death certificate and will push for a law to recognize all overseas same-sex marriages, which is still not legal in Australia.
Let's stay in Australia then. The Pride March on Sunday in Melbourne is going to be led by the Equal Love campaign to send a message to Canberra, the capital. The Liberal Party there, which is the Conservative Party, is blocking a vote in Parliament on same-sex marriage and insisting on a referendum. And now some members of the Liberal Party are coming out and saying, well, even if the referendum goes through, I may not vote for this. I may not vote for this anyway. And then Tony Abbott, who stepped down as the Conservative Prime Minister, flew to the United States to address Alliance Defending Freedom, the complete right-wing group. I mean, he's a nutcase.
Yeah.
But he's gone. But the new guy should be allowing a vote in Parliament and sparing a enormously expensive referendum on this.
And in Italy, where I erroneously said last week they were considering same-sex marriage, they are in fact considering civil unions, and...
Not if the Pope has anything to do about it.
Exactly.
He weighed in on this week, and now, again, I'm reminding you.
And they had huge rallies, pro and con, about this
There were
week.
rallies on our side in 100 cities, which is terrific.
Yeah.
But the Pope felt compelled to speak out. Now, in Argentina, when they were going to do marriage, which he had condemned as the work of the devil,
when he was in Argentina.
Yeah, he was the archbishop there, a cardinal. He said, oh, could you just do civil unions? And now they want civil unions in Italy, and he says no.
He's going backwards.
Yeah.
In Gibraltar, they are moving towards same-sex marriage, and they have decided not to have a public referendum, which is probably good news. In Portugal, same-sex marriage is legal, and then the legislature voted to allow adoption by same-sex couples, but the outgoing president, as one of his final acts, conservative, vetoed that bill.
So they're they're looking to override him.
They are.
All right.
And in Mexico, the Supreme Court has legalized marriage in another Mexican state, Jalisco state, the 6th state where it is now legal, which includes Guadalajara and Puerto Vallarta, big gay center.
Every time the Supreme Court gets one of these cases, they say, no, let them get married. And why don't you just do it for the whole country? Now, there was a little bit of this drib and drab in the United States.
Yes.
As states went by state. But let's just get it over with. They've got
They're getting there.
They've got 6 states that do it. They've got 25 where if you want it, you can get it somehow.
Well, one of the main problems is that even though it's legal, the governments are not necessarily following through on the appropriate benefits or rights or responsibilities or anything. So there is much work still to be done.
Let's talk about rights in Indonesia.
Okay.
The Ministry of Higher Education there, at first he banned LGBT support groups from universities, saying they're a threat to the nation's morality. Then he got attacked for this, and he said, "Oh, no, they're entitled to equal rights." He said, "Except I would not only ban. He says I would not ban LGBT people from campus unless they engage in disgusting activities like making love or showing affection." Well, give us a break, huh?
Well, if we're going to raise the question of disgusting activities and the story of the week, let's move to England.
Which one?
Poppers.
Oh, okay. We want the popper story.
Yes.
So they're banning a whole bunch of substances at once that affect the brain. Not alcohol, not tobacco, but
They're too popular.
A lot of things, and one of them is poppers. So they have an out gay Tory MP there. His name is Crispin Blunt. He spoke out on the floor. He says, "I'm gay. I use poppers, and this is ridiculous. This will, if you do this," he said, "people are going to lose all respect for law." So they went ahead and
can you imagine anyone on the floor of the United States Congress getting up and saying, "Not only am I gay, but I use poppers"?
If I liked my poppers, maybe I would. I don't know.
You're not a member of Congress.
I'm not, and I wasn't a big fan of poppers.
Yes.
But anyway, they're gonna. But they did. He tried to get an amendment to get this out of there. All they did is agree to do a study on poppers, and they'll make a new decision on it. But I also read in this that gay men use poppers 25 times more than non-gay men.
Then they had a whole debate over whether the point of poppers was to enable anal sex, which I think is ridiculous. But another MP weighed in on that discussion and said, "I've used them." One has to wonder about the Parliament. "I've used them, but my bottom remains intact."
Well,
does all this show up on television with question time and everything?
Yes. In reading all about poppers for this story, I read that the clubs used to actually spray it into the room in some of the discotheques to get everybody going at one point.
Wow.
All right.
Flashback to the 70s.
Also in Britain, a judge there concluded that former KGB officer who was poisoned in 2006 was poisoned by the Russian Secret Service, and the reason is because this former KGB guy had publicly said that Putin was into underage boys, and this was all in the they deny it in Moscow.
Really? All right. In Canada, the Manitoba Provincial Court has just had put in place a transgender judge, Kyle McKenzie, who is
got a picture, I think, somewhere.
I think we do.
Of Kyle McKenzie.
Am I doing this too? There we go.
There.
Yeah. Lawyer, active in the bar associations there, very prominent. Congratulations to Kyle.
And some progress in Botswana. The former president there, we have a picture of him, Festus Mogae, said that African leaders who refuse to acknowledge LGBT rights are selfish and have the wrong mentality.
I'm talking about you, Robert Mugabe.
I would say that goes actually worldwide.
Yeah.
Botswana's LGBT group is fighting in court to be recognized by the government. Mogae says he had anti-gay beliefs, but he has come to know LGBT people.
They've had some, I guess, an election in Guatemala. There is a lesbian feminist activist who is a new member of Congress. She is not a fan of the new president of Guatemala, who is a comedian who has become president. No comment. But she describes him as racist, sexist, and homophobic, and he's claiming to be an evangelical Christian. Do I hear echoes in this country?
Do. Well,
watch out.
Yes, we have people claiming to be Christians here.
Yes.
In Berlin, they're going to open an LGBT refugee center countering. There have been 100 incidents of violence just in the second half of this past year. LGBT refugees. It's going to house 125 of them. We need to be doing that all over the world to help protect them.
There are a lot of attacks taking place. We've read about the attacks on women in Europe by some refugees, and LGBT refugees are being attacked too.
And they're trying to educate the refugees. You're coming into these countries. This is the culture here. Men and women, you know, homosexuality,
I suspect
all that
some
kind
of them
stuff.
will say that's not our culture and we don't like your culture, and just because we're here doesn't mean we have to abide by your culture. I think it is, as we discussed before with the Israeli-Palestinian fight, these are tough issues to resolve. People have different opinions, and when you put people with different opinions together, you get different opinions.
Yes.
In Hong Kong, LGBT groups are blasting as useless a 2-year study that was released on their issues and are complaining about no action on any kind of non-discrimination rules or laws there.
In Russia, did we do this?
No.
No. A court there fined an activist, Sergei Alexeyenko, $1,200 for propagating non-traditional sexual relations just for issuing a statement in reference to a gay rights group that was elsewhere. His group in Murmansk has already been shut down in October for operating as foreign agents, and now he's getting fined.
They're not kidding around in Russia, even though they killed that new bill.
Because we already had enough to oppress the gays with. We didn't need a new bill.
Exactly. We can go after them no matter what. But in Italy, back to Italy, there are some soccer coaches there who have been fined for using gay-bashing language.
Well, the Napoli manager was fined 20,000 euros because he called the manager of the other team a faggot and other things. But the guy he was accused of was also fined for having a big confrontation with him.
Yeah.
And he said, he shouted poof and faggot at me. I would be proud to be that if he is what is considered a man. These guys.
That's kind of clever. Not so clever is Ghana, where three...
Well, by the way, the big guy apologized. He apologized. He said, if I did use those words, I apologize to the gay community. Well, that's progress.
Okay, sure, better than some places.
Better than John Rocker.
Oh my God, I was still doing that. In Ghana, 3 high school boys were expelled from school for supposedly being gay. Just thrown out of school.
In Romania, the right wing has collected 825,000 signatures for a constitutional amendment against same-sex marriage. The Romanian Orthodox priests were the instrumental in gathering the signatures.
Nice.
So they're going backwards there.
Have they run out of things to do?
These are my people.
Yeah.
My grandparents were from a town there.
The International Olympic Committee has issued new guidelines. Now, these are not rules, but these are guidelines to countries around the world competing in the Olympics about participation in competition by transgender athletes.
The old policy required gender reassignment surgery and 2 years of hormones. And now, surgery is no longer required for women to man athletes, but man to woman athletes need to show testosterone down to the cutoff point for at least a year.
It made me wonder whether there's testing among men or among trans men about high levels of testosterone and whether there are any standards about that.
Interesting.
But this was a big issue with the gay games for
Yes.
years, too. I served on the board of New York in '94, 22 years ago, and there were questions then about participation by trans athletes under what conditions and what rules. And there was a very old-fashioned policy in place that was the same as these old Olympic rules about 2 years of hormones and psychiatric evaluations and surgery, and it was very, very strict.
Should we just let everybody run in the race together?
Well, it's an interesting question about whether and how you separate people,
Right.
and whether you're trying to separate people by ability. You could have different categories that, the fastest people could be in one category of any gender or other description, and you could have different flights as you do in golf. Dependent on your handicap level, your
Right.
level of expertise, and have people compete against people of the same level. But then you take away the sort of best in the ability of women in this case, who presumably cannot run as fast or jump as high to win medals as the best in the world. I think it's an ongoing debate. But we had quite a fight related to the gay games about changing those standards for New York. And then for a while,
And that,
anyway.
that was what year? You were on the committee then.
'94 was the competition. We worked on it for 2 or 3 years beforehand up to the competition. And we had internal arguments and votes on the board about whether or not to loosen the standards. And what we came up with, and I think very rightly, was that people should compete in the gender in which they live their daily life.
Yes.
And that became the phrase that defined everything, and to this day I think would be appropriate for restroom discussions or sports participation or anything
Yes.
else. And that just has not been adopted widely enough, I think, as the standard. People are still trying to impose these other regulations.
All right.
But the IOC is, they have certainly allowed transgender participation in the gender in which people live their daily lives, but they imposed all these other conditions, and now they have amended that as a recommendation, not as a rule. So they haven't gone quite all the way yet.
Follow up to the Anglican story. The Anglican Communion excluded the Americans because we do same-sex, the Episcopal Church because they do same-sex marriages, when the aftermath of that is Canada, Brazil, Scotland, and South Africa, and New Zealand are considering doing gay marriages too. They're not backing down.
Among Anglicans or Episcopalians?
Yes.
Yes. Good. All right.
What else do we have? Okay, shall we move on?
Sure.
Yeah. AIDS news.
Yeah. There's a report in Pause magazine that condom use is down in major urban areas, mostly because people are trying to assess real risk. They are sero-sorting, they are using pre-exposure prophylaxis, they are using more testing. So people are trying to make some kind of intelligent decision, but the thrust, you should excuse the expression, is always toward trying to not have to use condoms.
But that opens you up to other STIs.
And of course,
and it not only opens it, but that's what's happening. There's an epidemic of syphilis and gonorrhea and other things. So use condoms. Charlie Rangel says that President Obama is going to issue an executive order to rein in the pharmaceutical prices. Now, Martin Shkreli is under indictment, is going to be called to the House January 26th. Did that happen yesterday?
I haven't seen. I saw that he was going to be called to testify.
What about all the others?
Yeah, bring in the war criminals to testify.
Like the tobacco companies.
Whatever.
Okay.
We celebrate the life and mourn the loss
Yes.
of a great AIDS activist, Sharon Maxwell. She was a woman living with AIDS. She also had polio and died, I think, of heart disease.
Cancer, wasn't it?
Cancer, sorry.
Led the international ACTG.
The AIDS Clinical Trial Group.
Yes.
A member of the Community Advisory Board of the ACTG for more than 20 years. She lived in Illinois, worked extensively with our associate producer, Bill Ballman, and he tells us that she was really beloved, an amazing activist, and a huge loss to the community.
In New Mexico, a U.S. district judge has ruled that a man with HIV using medical marijuana legally was not protected from dismissal by his employer, who forbade marijuana use. They said, well, maybe the state would do it, but this is, there's a federal issue here, and the state can't require employers to accommodate what federal law specifically prohibits.
Very, very tricky.
The AIDS Healthcare Foundation in LA has filed a complaint against the FDA, against Gilead, for promoting off-label use of Truvada. This is harassment, basically, on the part of AIDS Healthcare Foundation, which is very anti-Truvada, although they supposedly modified their position. And an HIV study found that 70% of, I'm sorry, this isn't an HIV study. This is HPV study. Found that 70% of head and neck cancers were attributable to it, and oral sex is the way that you get HPV.
Yeah.
So get the vaccine if you can. If you don't have HPV already.
Well, be tested.
Get the vaccine.
Yeah. All right, entertainment news. A couple of things I want to recommend. There's a movie opening in LA this Friday, maybe already this weekend, depending on when you're seeing this in that area. Portrait of a Serial Monogamist. For those of you who thought Carol was a little too arch and a little too 50s, this is a contemporary lesbian sitcom kind of thing done in Toronto, and entertaining.
I finally saw The Big Short and Room, because I'm a SAG-AFTRA voter, and I'm impressed with both of them enormously.
Well, I think The Big Short is the movie of the year, and I was thrilled to see that the Producers Guild just gave it its Best Picture award. I watched it for a second time and thought it held up and was still wonderful. And they also awarded Amy the Best Documentary, again.
Yes, about Amy Winehouse.
Also my favorite. But I also saw Beasts of No Nation, which is a stunning, stunning movie. And I was a little
with Idris Elba.
Yeah, it's about war in Africa and child soldiers and stuff. It's actually very funny a lot at the beginning. It goes back and forth between humor and tragedy. Very watchable. Really highly recommend Beasts of No Nation.
Okay, I have a correction from last week. I thought Noises Off was written by Alan Ayckbourn. I'm sitting there watching Noises Off and saying, this is just so much like Ayckbourn. Of course, it's Michael Frayn who wrote it and not Alan Ayckbourn. So thank you to the alert viewer who let me know about that. There are films in the works on designer Alexander McQueen, directed by Andrew Hay, who did Looking on HBO. It's written by Chris Urch, who's The Rolling Stone, about the persecution of gays in Uganda, just opened to raves in London at a theater there. Hay is also he's also the one who directed Charlotte Rampling in 45 Years. Charlotte, who caused all the Oscar trouble this week on her race comment she pulled back. It's your last chance to see Motherstruck with Stacey Ann Chin at the Culture Project. Friday, January 29th at 8 o'clock is the last performance, directed by our pal Cynthia Nixon. And at Dixon Place, I saw gay cable network veteran Nora Burns pour her heart out in a show called David's Friend, about her best friend David, a trip through New York in the 70s
Hi,
to
Nora.
today. Hi, Nora. And that's her with her friend David, and it really was hilarious and heartbreaking.
I bet.
To use a couple of cliches, but it was.
Yeah.
I hope she revives it.
Yeah, just a one-night only performance. Sorry, I missed it. And you saw Our Mother's Brief Affair.
Well, this is a new Richard Greenberg play. It's about his 8th on Broadway with Linda Lavin, who was always good right there in the middle. But the play is so silly and at some points offensively trivializing the Rosenberg case. It's about an aging suburban woman who wants to feel important through association with a notorious part of history. And
so that's what she picks?
And in the end, it's a slightly written sketch that wants to be important through association with a notorious part of history. I mean, to say any more would completely give away the stupid plot. But I will say that when they did a little reveal at the end of the first act, it woke me up a bit. But
I got a note from a viewer who's excited about something happening on TV on February 21st. They're doing some kind of special to celebrate the sitcom director Jim Burrows, and it's going to include a reunion of the Will and Grace cast, which will only horrify you. But
I wasn't horrified by Will and Grace.
Yes, you were.
No, I wasn't horrified by it. I just didn't get into it. What's wrong with that?
That is not true.
Am I a bad
day? You don't have to like it, but to claim that you were not horrified by it is a little historical revisionism.
I wasn't horrified, but I was a little bit offended. Anyway.
Yes, you were.
And by Our Mother's Brief Affair with Linda Lavin. There's a biopic. I don't know if I'll be offended by this, but there's a biopic in the works about Robert Mapplethorpe by director Andy something, with Matt Smith of Doctor Who playing Mapplethorpe, and Joja Mamet, is that how you say her name?
Yes.
As Patti Smith. Now, Robert died at 42 of AIDS in 1989.
Well, maybe more horrifying is the casting of the Michael Jackson biopic.
The whole biopic is about Michael Jackson because it's going to have Joseph Fiennes as Michael Jackson.
Yes.
Joseph Fiennes is not a man of color.
Not at all.
He's from the Fiennes family. He's Rafe's brother.
But for more controversy, how's that? I sound like Sarah Palin.
What's in that?
Skirmishes.
What's in that?
Water.
Water.
The Oscars remain a bone of contention. Alexis Arquette, the transgender Arquette sister of Roseanne and Patricia, said Will and Jada Smith have some nerve complaining about racism at the Oscars when they're such closet cases.
Yeah, wow.
We have no information on this. We report, you decide. And then Ian McKellen stepped into all this by saying, I support the protests of racism at the Oscars, but let's add in a little homophobia. The only people who win awards for playing gay parts are straight men, Tom Hanks, Sean Penn, Philip Seymour Hoffman. And I thought, well, yes, but then there are the closet cases who win, like Kevin Spacey or Laurence Olivier, or was Charles Lawton out?
I don't.
Probably not.
Probably not.
But Joel Grey won, and John Gielgud won, and Jodie Foster won, and Katharine Hepburn won, and Julie Andrews, and Joan Crawford, and Anna Paquin.
It goes on and on and on.
Of course, Hillary Swank won.
What would show business be without LGBT people?
We'll find out next week.
Okay.
Tune in to Gay USA.
Thanks for being
we'll see
with
you
us.
then. Bye.